the world of fossils and geology.
Right. But I mean, the way you describe it, is different than like my experience seeing it, because my experience was that Saoirse's, the character's husband, was in the same profession as you. And she was sort of lost and repressed and, kind of didn't quite know who she was and sickly. And you get stuck with her, and there's something about your character's relationships with rocks and with this process of unearthing these dinosaur pieces, and her sort of, her hardness. I mean, it's a very hard character, but it becomes such an emotionally deep, that when the relationship finally consummates into something that is, you're able to release some emotions, it's incredibly, moving, because it's such a quiet movie. And I don't even your performance. I mean, you don't talk that much.
No.
And,
I know.
And all the framing of what you're saying about this woman's role in the world, it's really obscured by the fact that she's living in this like gray life where she just goes out and hammers rocks out there to find things. Like, I can see how it all fits together in the museum and stuff, but her actual day-to-day life seemed something, akin to like, there was some, oh God, the longing of the whole thing was really too much. So how do you, talking about work, I mean, how do you look at that story? I mean, I see how you just explained to me the story and how you read it, but I mean, do you rely completely on what's written to kind of find your way emotionally in that thing?
Well, Mary Anning, when we see her in the film, she's in her early 40s.
Yeah.
She actually died at the age of 47 eventually, Mary Anning, sadly, of breast cancer. But we meet her at a time in the story where she is tired. She's living alone with her mother in quite an isolated, private world. She was never socially very confident or comfortable anyway, largely because people just thought she was this mysterious woman who dug up sea monsters. There was an air of sort of, well, is she a witch, or what is she? So she had sort of retreated from society and hidden herself away. And as you point out, Charlotte Murchison, played by Saoirse Ronan, is brought to Mary because she's very unwell and therefore considered not strong enough for the rigors of an overseas journey that her husband, who's also a scientist, is about to make. So yeah, as you say, he dumps her and leaves her behind for Mary to mentor, care for. And Mary really only accepts this position because she needs the money.
Right.
So, which is so tragic, really, and sad that Mary was so desperate for money. But then Charlotte becomes very ill, and it's through nursing Charlotte back to health, almost like she was her own child, that Mary realizes that she does feel for this woman. She feels this woman's sadness. There's something that's happened in her life that has made her quite closed off and lonely. And so they connect in this strange sort of fractured, lonely world that they've both been living in. And then, as you say, Mary, there isn't a lot of talking. Mary doesn't speak very much in the film. And it's really interesting when people point this out to me, because, of course, for me, there's a lot going on in her head and her mind all the time. There was a lot of story to be told. And the script was very visual, very detailed in its description of, just the space, the atmosphere in the room, the sounds of the birds, the crackle of the fire, the crashing of the waves. It was a very, very detailed, textured script when I first read it. And I absolutely loved it for those reasons. But yes, you're right. The longing and the very gradual connection between these two women that grows through the affection they have for one another and the work that they're doing together out on those beaches, and Mary teaching Charlotte what she can and what she knows.
Yeah.
And, it's a story about self-discovery, because who we choose to love can end up defining who we are. And at the end of the film, Mary and Charlotte, as individual women, are quite different to the women that you meet at the beginning of the story. And I love that about it. I really appreciate that about the film.
I didn't know what to expect, and I hadn't seen a movie like that in a long time. I don't feel like they make movies like that much anymore, where and there's a poetry to it, and there's sort of a visual sensibility that's obviously very articulated and thought through. And also, like, you know, once you guys consummate, you know, your love and the sexual scenes, you know, are graphic and profound, but earned and not gratuitous in any way. But, you know, very respectful and very raw, you know, that to see both of those women explode in that type of energy and then kind of regroup it's pretty, that must have been insane to shoot. I mean, I've been on sets where, you know, they're closed sets, but it must have been sort of like, all right, everybody out.
Well, I mean, there's, you know, I think what was wonderful for Saoirse and I about the two people playing the actors playing these parts was that we were able to access in our preparation letters, real love letters that were written between women who were actually in marriages to men,
right? But
were quietly connecting in a sort of a sisterhood way that spilt over into intense friendship that then would become very intense, intimate sexual relationships that would last a lifetime. And so we wanted to, in very, very detailed
that's right,
information in these letters that we were able to access.
You have that other relationship with the woman in town that seems loaded, and that might have, like, it's not quite explained, but it's understood.
Yeah, it's very clear that Mary Anning had a previous connection with Elizabeth Philpott, who was also a real character in history, by the way, who lives locally in the town. So, but, you know, one thing that Saoirse and I really did feel, and talking about the film now, you know, I've just learned so much about what happens when you remove the heterosexual stereotypes from a film, you know, and how in films so often we objectify women in a very automatic way, almost like we're breathing without even thinking about it. And because we didn't have the objectification of women in any way in our film, it was utterly equal and connected because of the love these two people share for each other. For me, it was almost like a breath of fresh air. You know, there was no leader. You know, so often you read a heterosexual love scene on paper in a script, and the man is often the one who's wooing and leading, and the woman is flirting or wanting to be sort of taken in some way. You know, these things are very automatically written.
Right.
Or very often when reading a heterosexual love scene on paper, it will say something like, the woman's on top, dominating now.
Right.
Why can't she just know what she wants? Why does she have to be dominating? You know, and then we get this sort of generalized description of the woman as a whole in a way that we would never get that same description of the male counterpart.
Right.
And we didn't have any of that in Ammonite. And that for me was new. It was really new. And I just, it was like a,
that's interesting.
It was very interesting. And it was a relief to be part of something that was, you know, utterly equal and connected and safe because of those things.
Right. And because, like, you don't really, it's almost a surprise to everyone when it kind of happens, when it finally consummates. Yeah. And also there's so many layers of clothing involved. It's hard to objectify.
That's true. They did wear a lot of clothes in those days. So therefore there were a lot of things that needed to come off. That is correct. Well observed.
But I mean, the when it does happen, I don't know that I would have thought about it like that, because, you know, I'm not thinking about it coming from the angle that you are, but especially given your history with the pushback against the type of objectification, I think that, like, it seems that early on you realized that you didn't want to have anything to really do with that kind of the way that show business or movies puts people or women in that position.
Well, I think I certainly, you know, what's really interesting to me, you know, I look back on my 20s and things that people would say about me when I was still trying to figure out who the hell I was, quite honestly. Well, you know, curvy Kate, you know, people would talk about me as being different because I was, you know, slightly bigger than average. Meanwhile, I was like a size 6 or what. I have no idea. But that stuff was so shocking to me because I would then push back and say, well, this is just who I am. Well, then I was labeled as being ballsy. Then I was labeled as being, you know, strong, headstrong. No, I'm just telling you that I like carbs.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? Right. You know?
Yeah.
But that's changed now, Mark. You know, that's one area I would say that I think we are doing globally a little better, is that we are celebrating real women much more. You know, back in those days, in the 90s, you know, Hollywood was you know, completely riddled with very, very slender women who were, you know, in a way that was perhaps not entirely balanced or perhaps quite right. And I think that's gone a bit now. I think
that's true.
I think we're much more able to not comment quite so much, not judge. You know, back in those days, we were judging all the time.
And you were doing it to yourself as well, because, you know, the fix was in on your brain, I imagine. I mean, I think it's a woman's struggle. Many women struggle without acting, just in life, to accept themselves.
Yeah, and I that's true. And I would definitely say that, you know, that you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I do feel now, you know, as the woman who has played Mary Anning in this film and in being a part of those scenes that we've just been talking about, I feel very proud of my 45-year-old self. You know, I've had 3 children. I am who I am. This is a different me, different physical me to the one that I was in my early 20s, et cetera, et cetera. And I really felt privileged to be a part of those scenes and not hide any of my true self. And even in the film in general, just the way, you know, the way my face is now, you know, I have the wrinkles and crunkles that exist on my face now. I'm proud of those things, you know, the age in the backs of my hands that I've loved and lost and cared for, you know.
Yeah.
I really, really value and appreciate being able to show all of those things without censorship and without hesitation as well. You know, there's a lot to be said for that. And maybe I am confident enough to do that now, you know, whereas I definitely wouldn't have been when I was younger.
Well, yeah, there's a fine line as you get older between confidence and not giving a fuck anymore about certain things.
Yeah. That's true. I'm going to remember that. Yeah, isn't there a saying where when you're a woman at a certain point, you have to choose between your ass and your face or something like that.
But I'm just finding with so many things that used to seem so important, you know, you get to a certain age where you're like, how the hell was I so hung up on that?
Yeah.
You know, but I thought all those scenes in the movies were played very, you know, honestly, and you could feel the honesty of the acting and of being in those moments. Like, it really is a special movie. And you explaining it to me in the context of, you know, cultural objectification and whatnot is really that. I mean, that's powerful as well, because I felt what I felt watching the entire movie, and I found it to be something unique in terms of how it depicts women, just period, you know, in terms of films.
I mean, I'm really, you know, I'm really thrilled to hear that, you know, because for me, it's a story about 2 people who fall in love, and the fact that they are both women is never explained or addressed with any degree of secrecy or fear. And for me, that's quite important, because, you know, by telling a story in that way, I think we're contributing to hopefully normalizing same-sex connection in films, and perhaps, you know, the progression of how audiences view LGBTQ people and their relationships will slip much more into our mainstream if we're able to tell stories in this way without making secrecy or fear part of the narrative.
Or fetishizing.
I love that wasn't part of it. Exactly. You know, which is just a dated way of thinking, quite frankly.
I agree. But at this point, like, because it's sort of interesting. I was talking to my producer about it. You know, the type of women that you have played in your life. I mean, yeah, you know, and I don't know who, I can't remember what other actress I asked this, that you do collect a certain amount of personas. I think that you've moved through a lot of feminine persona. I think I asked Glenn Close about this, you know, what stays with you, you know, because if you look at even going into like Eternal Sunshine, do you feel that all these women have moved through you? I mean, when you look at the women you've played, the different types of women?
Yeah, I do a bit. I do. And it's interesting because when I do look back over my career, you know, I always can remember exactly what was going on in my life at the time that I was playing a certain role. And And at the time, I would have had no concept of the fact that actually I was definitely channeling a personal something through a character, or was playing that role.
Well, what was that during
reasons
Eternal
connected
Sunshine?
to my own life.
What was it? What were you going?
During Eternal Sunshine, I'd had my daughter. I was feeling really independent. You know, I'd moved to New York. It was just like a time of kind of, you know, fun.